I call the member for Burdekin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I rise to make a brief contribution to the Heavy Vehicle National Law and other legislation amendment bill 2018. I note there are a number of provisions contained within this bill and that this legislation is the cornerstone of the COAG National Heavy Vehicle Reform agenda, ensuring that the industry can operate across state borders without conflicting regulatory requirements. Mr Deputy Speaker, I will in my response relate my experience as a former police officer in dealing with heavy vehicle regulation and compliance, and I can certainly attest to the problems that we used to experience in enforcing heavy vehicle legislation in this state, particularly for interstate truck drivers. I note the bill amends the Heavy Vehicle National Law to create a positive due diligence obligation on executive officers that will apply to all safety-related offences and to require the NHVR to maintain a database of heavy vehicles. This database is important for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the need to have consistency in the application of laws across the country. We know that heavy vehicle operators work across Australia, and the maintenance of a database of heavy vehicles is pivotal to understanding who is operating heavy vehicles on our roads, where they are operating, and more importantly, whether they are committing offences. Heavy vehicle registration can be a complex issue, and if you speak to staff involved in the registering of heavy vehicles, they will certainly tell you that it is both time-consuming and multifaceted. I note that Queensland will continue performing registration-related functions, and I certainly hope the appropriate level of support and training is ongoing and being provided to departmental and police staff to assist them with the performance of this function. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to turn to the road safety aspects of this bill, and in particular the amendments to the Transport Operations Road Use Management Act 1995 and the Transport Planning and Coordination Act 1994, which will improve road safety by increasing the penalties for driving offences involving death or grievous bodily harm, allowing a registered operator of a vehicle to be notified of offences committed in their vehicle by another person, allowing a police officer who conducts a roadside test for drug driving to also conduct any subsequent saliva analysis, and clarifies the duties of drivers involved in road crashes in particular. Usually, Mr Deputy Speaker, the officer who conducts the roadside drug test is the same officer who arrests the offenders. Currently, when testing for drug driving offences, the police officer who operates a subsequent saliva analysing instrument must not be the same officer who arrested the driver or who performed the preliminary roadside saliva test. The current legislative requirement for two officers to be involved provided for corroboration of questions asked of the driver and of the indicia displayed by that driver. This, of course, presents significant problems for single officer police stations, and particularly those in isolated or remote areas of the state. Certainly, the technological advances in saliva analysing instruments means that the restriction preventing the roadside officer operating the analysing instrument is no longer necessary. This means that officers in localities such as Laura, up in Cape York, where I used to be stationed, can conduct these tests. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is nothing more callous or offensive than a driver failing to remain at the scene of a traffic accident where someone is dead or apparently dead. And I am pleased that this bill clarifies that a driver involved in an accident where someone is killed or apparently dead must remain at the scene. Mr Deputy Speaker, I note the three recommendations from the committee, and in particular recommendations 2 and 3. I certainly support a review of the Heavy Vehicle National Law as it is highly likely further changes or amendments will be required in due course regarding this legislation. Having regard to recommendation 3, I want to make a comment on the inclusion of the term negligent. At the present time, we have a simple offence of driving without due care and attention, and we then have the much more serious criminal offence of dangerous driving. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, if I can use examples of what might constitute driving without due care and attention, someone who is playing with their car radio, spills coffee into their lap and momentarily takes their eyes off the road. I've had drivers who have dropped cigarette butts into their lap. That type of thing is an example of driving without due care and attention. If you can contrast that with dangerous driving, where someone might be travelling at excessive speed, driving through a red traffic light, crossing double lines, you can see that there is a significant difference there. Where the problem arises, of course, is if someone who is fiddling with the radio in their car is involved in a traffic accident where the driver or pedestrian is killed. Then it makes it very, very difficult to take that to a court of law or to decide what to actually charge that person with, because it may not, in the true sense of the word, constitute dangerous driving, but someone has been killed, and there is an expectation from the broader community and from relatives, as we've heard from my colleague, the member for Burnett, already elaborate, that there would be a significant term of imprisonment imposed and/or a fine and a subsequent driver's licence disqualification period. And that's where the issue arises with regard to this legislation. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, if the Minister is to include the term negligent, I would ask for clarification as to whether that is to be included in the offence of driving without due care and attention, or the offence of dangerous driving, or a separate new offence is to be created. It's my submission here today that a new criminal offence be created of negligent driving causing death or grievous bodily harm with relevant circumstances of aggravation around intoxication, unlicensed or disqualified driving. It may well be that section 289 of the Criminal Code, duty of persons in charge of dangerous things, could be amended to incorporate this provision, and with the House's indulgence, I will read that section. It is the duty of every person who has in the person's charge or under the person's control anything, whether living or inanimate, and whether moving or stationary, of such a nature that, in the absence of care or precaution in its use or management, the life, safety or health of any person may be endangered, to use reasonable care and take reasonable precautions to avoid such danger, and the person is held to have caused any consequences which result to the life or health of any person by reason of any omission to perform that duty. So, as you can see, Mr Deputy Speaker, it would very easily fit within the parameters of what we're talking about here today to incorporate the term negligent into that particular definition, which would make it a criminal offence. Because there's certainly a community expectation out there, and as I alluded to previously from my colleague, the member for Burnett, that where drivers cause death or serious injury to a third party, that they are appropriately punished. And as legislators, we have a duty to ensure appropriate legislation is in place that reflects community expectations. And I certainly hope that the Minister has taken that on board, and I've listened to your contribution today, Minister, and I appreciate where you are coming from with this. But there is, to me, a definite need to have some changes, some legislative changes made, which, if you like, creates that offence between driving without due care and attention and dangerous operation of a motor vehicle. And I certainly hope that going forward we can take that on board and look at implementing legislation which reflects that. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. I call the member for Aspley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy